All right. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking Investors. We talk to investors about how they broke into venture, how they think about portfolio theory, and all things venture. Today, I'm very excited to be talking to Nikhil Basu Trivedi, who's a co-founder and GP of Footwork. Welcome to the show. How's it going?
Great. Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I'm looking forward to learning all about kind of your road into venture and opinions that you have kind of on all things venture. So the first the first question I think is the one that I usually ask to just give people context is how ultimately did you kind of make your way into venture? If you can kind of walk through, just in short, kind of how you found your way in, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I actually, started in venture capital early in my career. I joined a venture firm called Insight Partners in New York. Back then it was called Insight Venture Partners, now Insight Partners, as a summer intern in the summer of 2010. And I was 21 at the time. And so, uh, you know, a few of us were lucky to be part of that summer intern class at Insight. And Insight's one of the few firms that recruits folks really early on in their careers. But before Insight, I had started a company back when I was an undergrad called Artsy, where I was on the founding team. My co-founder and CEO was Carter Cleveland. And so, we worked on that starting in 2008. And I got my exposure to entrepreneurship and the venture capital ecosystem by working on Artsy for those um, that first year plus. And I realized when we were pitching VCs that they had a really cool job, and so that's what got me interested in trying to go down the path of being an investor. And Insight's the place that gave me that chance to start out. And so I joined Insight at 21. I spent a couple of years at Insight and then joined Shasta Ventures out here in the Bay Area in 2012. Spent almost 8 years at Shasta, and now have started Footwork.
All right, I appreciate you sharing that. So let's just kind of dive into the new firm of Footwork. So when you decided to, well, actually, let's start before when you decided. At what point did you realize you wanted to start your own fund, your own firm, and how do you think about what type of firm to make? Like, what? How would you know it was going to be early stage or late stage? Did you want to do wide portfolio or concentrated? Like, I guess, like, how would you come up with the initial concept for Footwork?
Yeah, so I've always been an entrepreneur at heart, back in the Artsy days, or even when I was an undergrad working on a number of different startup ideas, working on the entrepreneurship club on campus. Um, and so I think for a long time now, I've had the idea percolating in the back of my head of being an entrepreneur again and combining my passion for entrepreneurship with my day-to-day love of investing by building a new venture firm. And the question for me was just when I could go try to do that um, versus if, because I think it was always this dream of mine to do this. Um, and I think I got fortunate that I spent 10 years between Insight and Shasta getting to learn the business and learning how two different firms practice it, but also joining boards of companies and seeing how a bunch of other investors practice their craft. And so I think I had the foundation from that time to figure out what type of firm I wanted to build. Um, and what I got excited about was being focused at the early stage, having a more concentrated strategy, taking ownership in companies and joining boards, kind of the classic early stage venture capital model. And I felt in the market today, there are a lot of firms that used to practice that have become multi-stage and multi-sector, what I call agglomerator firms. And I felt like there were less really high quality, sort of more concentrated early stage firms in the market today, and many more folks that are broader in their focus and in their strategy. So that was one of the reasons to go do Footwork and to employ the strategy that we have today. But then the other key thing became who to build a firm with, and that was actually the more important piece for me, which is who do I want to work with for the next 20, 30 plus years. Being in a partnership in a venture firm is just like being in a marriage. It's a really long-term commitment. between one another with one's limited partners and with the founders that you work with. And I just feel really fortunate to have found my partner, Mike Smith, um, and have the two of us come together to build this firm, because I think that was probably the more important piece than the strategy and what we're actually doing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about the people, and the people you work with, people you don't, etc. So a few more questions, kind of basic questions on footwork. Are you thesis driven? Are there types of sectors that you're trying to get into, or more generalist? How have you kind of thought about that angle?
Yeah. So what Mike and I like to do is be thesis driven. There are two very broad areas that we're investing in out of this fund. The first is consumer technology, and the second is consumerization of enterprise technology. And so, what does that mean that we don't do? We're not going to do, deep technology, infrastructure software, security software. We're unlikely to do like a biotech company. But there's a lot that falls under the consumer tech and consumerization of enterprise tech mandates. And so our approach is to go deep within certain thesis areas in those very broad sectors, map out those areas, talk to a bunch of founders in those areas, develop a point of view, and then make an investment. To give you an example, our first investment in the fund, which we actually haven't yet announced, is in a company called Table 22. And this is a company that's a business in a box platform. It enables restaurants to offer subscriptions in the same way that Substack enables newsletter writers to offer subscriptions, or Patreon enables any creator to offer subscriptions and offer memberships. Table 22 enables that for restaurant businesses. And Mike and I had been thinking about business and box platforms for a while. We also know consumer subscriptions really well through Mike's background being president and chief operating officer at Stitch Fix, through my investments in companies like the Farmer's Dog, Pill Club, Imperfect Foods, Literati. And so Table 22 is at the convergence of a number of different thesis areas that we were spending time in, where we actually proactively reached out to that company, found it, and decided to lead, in this case, a Series seed round. And that's hopefully indicative of the approach that you'll see from us. You'll see us publish content around the areas that we're interested in, have a point of view, and build a portfolio that way.
And for my last question, specifically about footwork, I mentioned before we started recording that, like, for some reason that I can't exactly put my finger on, like, the name stands out. It's cool, it's original, it's unique. Walk us through, like, where did footwork come from? Can you kind of talk about the origins of the name?
Sure. So Mike and I were searching for a name that felt authentic for us, first and foremost. And one of the things that we have in common is a passion for a bunch of different sports. For Mike in particular, basketball and soccer, what we prefer to call football. For me, football as well, but also sports like cricket and tennis that I played growing up. And one of the commonalities amongst all these sports is footwork being a really important foundational element to actually being able to play the sport. And so we like that connotation of, like, this is a foundational element to playing a sport, to perhaps, performing, to, building a company as well. What the word actually means is skillful maneuvering, adroitly responding to new opportunities. And so, again, a trait that we hope our founders have and that we have as a firm. And then finally, what we liked about it is there's no other, business really associated with that name. And so we have the chance to own it. And it actually came to me in a dream, weirdly enough. I woke up and I said to my wife, what do you think of footwork? And then I texted Mike, and that's how we got excited about the name. And so we hope that, founders resonate with it as well. And I'm glad you like it too.
The real question here is, when you woke up from your dream and came up with footwork, did you go to sleep that night, or were you just up the rest of the night, so excited? No, I'm just joking, but it's a great name.
It was in the morning.
Morning. Got it. Very cool. So I want to go back in time a little bit. You said something that was pretty cool in that, like, you spent some time at Insight. you spent a lot of time at Shasta, and now you've kind of learned from two different firms. Now you're starting your own. Can you kind of walk us through in the way that you want, like how did you ultimately go about optimizing for the most learning at those two firms to kind of set you up to be a successful founder and co-founder and GP of Footwork? Like how would you think about learning when you were given that opportunity for that decade?
Yeah, I mean, I think the core of the venture capital business is 4 or 5 elements. I typically talk about them as 5 pieces of the business, and I've written about this in a blog post about the venture capital flowchart if anyone's interested. But those 5 elements are find, decide, win, help, and exit. And what you do as a venture capitalist is each of those things, right? You're trying to find the best companies to invest in. You're trying to make high quality investment decisions, decide. You're trying to win the right to invest because the best founders have options for who they pick as an investor. Then you're trying to help those companies that you have invested in, and then ultimately you're trying to get a great exit. And so, find, decide, win, help, exit is sort of the flow chart that powers our jobs day to day as venture capitalists. And what I was lucky to have at Insight and at Shasta was the chance to practice sort of each of those elements of the business. I really got to find companies to invest in from day one at Insight, from day one at Shasta. I got to be more and more involved in the investment decision and ultimately making decisions for myself to be able to build my own track record at Shasta. I found myself in several competitive scenarios to try to win the right to invest and win over founders against other firms. And then I actually got to join boards of several companies at Shasta and work really closely with, over 20 investments there. And then a few of them actually exited too. So I got to see the whole life cycle of our business, basically in my 20s. And so that taught me a ton about how to do each of those elements. And then the final thing that I learned was, actually being part of a partnership. Because all those things all those 5 elements I just described, they happen typically in a silo for an individual investor, but then they also happen at the partnership level. And so figuring out how to design a partnership where the whole is actually greater than the sum of the parts was something I got to actually think through at Shasta. And a lot of my learnings that are hopefully now embedded in what Mike and I are building at Footwork are not just about that individual day-to-day as a VC, but also about how a partnership operates and how a partnership can be most effective.
I love those 5 points. It almost simplifies a very complex type of business, which I think is cool. So how do you think about it ultimately when you go out into the market in 2020 or 2021 and you see there's 500,000 deals crossing your desk every second? How do you think about spending your time today? So I guess the question is, you wake up, how do you spend your time today in this market? And also if you have any thoughts on the current market, I'd love to hear, because I do think this is kind of unprecedented speed. I'm curious if you have any opinions on if this is the new normal, like I mentioned before. Do you think it's going to subside? Kind of what your thoughts are on what's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to answer that final question first. I think for the last few years, every year, we've been saying, wow, this pace is really fast. This market is really hot. At some point, it's going to die down, and it just hasn't. And so I think I sort of don't think too much about anymore how the market's going to change, because I don't think I'm very good at predicting it. But I try to live in the moment of the market to figure out how to operate in this market. And what's also important here is what the firm's strategy is. And so for us at Footwork, because we're not building, a broad portfolio, we're more concentrated. We're trying to get our ownership in every investment. We want the chance with every investment we make to return the fund. And that's our mental model every time we go into a company. And we're likely going to make somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 investments out of this first fund in the next, call it 2.5, 3 years. And so what does that mean? That means it's probably something like 6 investments that we're going to make as a firm every year. And so one of the things that I think about, every time I spend time with a company is this going to be one of those 6 investments this year? Is it going to be, let's say, Mike and I each end up leading 3 for the year, right? Is it one of the 3 for me that I'm so passionate about that I feel like we have to do this year? And so what we're searching for at the end of the day is a company and a set of founders that are outliers on certain dimensions, that really spike for us, that get us so excited that we feel we have to be part of their journey. And so whether that spikiness is because of the founder or because of the product market fit or because of the market opportunity and its chance to expand, or because of the product itself and just how breakthrough and revolutionary it seems, there has to be a spike like that to get really excited, because our bar is just high when we're building a concentrated portfolio in the way that we're building. So I hope that makes sense and gives some color to founders as well.
There's this book, or it could be a blog post by Derek Sivers, where the concept that is, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no. And I feel like it kind of like applies to venture. Like you're either like definitely doing it right, or it's like maybe not. And it's fun because through the founder part of this podcast, I get to like in my head like, oh, like I'm really excited about this. If I had a checkbook, like I totally would have conviction there, and it's like almost practice for me for when I turn like 30 or 35, whenever I want to start a fund or have the ability to. I have the kind of that model. So ultimately, I guess a couple more questions, and this next one is not about you, but about hundreds, if not thousands, of young college age, maybe high school, maybe post grad, age people that are trying to break into venture, like because of Twitter, because of just like where we're at in the internet right now. Venture capital is very visible to a lot of people, and many people just like you back in 2010 want to break in. I'm curious for you, do you have any advice or tips for the standard, maybe post grad or senior in college who wants to break into venture in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first is, figure out ways in which you can do the job before you even have the job. And the amazing thing about the ecosystem today is you can do some of the aspects, such as finding companies, such as sort of making pseudo investment decisions, such as helping companies without even being in the seat, right? Like of being in a venture firm. You can kind of do what I think you've been doing some of over the last several years, which is reaching out to founders that you're excited about, having a reason that they want to chat with you, like doing a podcast or a newsletter or something else, and then figuring out like which are the ones that you would invest in and why. You could even write up sort of investment memos. I'm really impressed by folks like Tona Novak, who's now got his own fund called Banana Capital. I mean, he basically built like a simulation venture portfolio without having any dollars to invest, I believe at the time, but just published like that portfolio and started doing content and has now broken into the industry that way. And so I think it's sort of like what I just said about, for founders, what we're searching for are outliers on a certain dimension, hopefully several dimensions. I think because venture capital has become more crowded, because there's so many more people who are interested in doing it, I think to get into it, you also have to figure out how you yourself are an outlier on one or more dimensions. And so, whether that thing that is spiky for you is content that you create, or whether it's something that you do in your career that can really help founders once you get into the business, to help them be more successful, or whether it's something around like your own decision making and judgment that you refine over time. Like figure out what that thing is and go just try to do it before you're even in the seat. I think that's the most practical advice I could give anyone.
I do have to do a slight humble brag. I actually interviewed Turner Novak like a year and a half ago on this podcast. I think he might have actually been one of the first investors I ever interviewed. And to see
Nice.
what he's done is it like he's the meme lord. Like he's just like on Twitter, he just like dominates. Well, actually, I have a question there, which I think is, I guess, a topic now. There's this conversation going on Twitter, a more of a trend where like memes are the people that control the memes, like control the attention, and like this shift with like Gen Z, growing up, and millennials really growing up. I'm curious for you, do you have an opinion on like funny VCs versus not? Are you doing memes, or are you just behind the scenes? Because it seems to be like there's kind of this war on Twitter. Like I don't really know how to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think content wise, everyone has to figure out for themselves what is most authentic. And for me, I don't think I'm funny enough to be a meme lord of VC Twitter. I'm not like Logan Bartlett or Turner Novak or some of these other folks who are just legitimately really funny. Um, it often irks me that I'll put in like 12 hours into a blog post, publish it, and like it probably gets, a fraction of the reads of, Logan, sitting, at his desk and thinking of something funny and tweeting it out there in the world and having it blow up. But I don't begrudge those people, because I think, again, that's a certain skill. And I think the question um, that I ask myself is, what's going to lead me to, find the next great founder? What's going to help me with my own decision making? And so what I like to put my effort into is the longer form blog posts, which I used to do on a weekly basis, and I've been a little bit delinquent on recently because I've just been so busy with getting the firm off the ground. But I do think those posts are valuable for founders, and they reach the types of founders that I hope to reach. I actually, even had a founder take my consumer subscriptions post where I lay out 10 factors of consumer subscriptions, and she pitched me in a first meeting with a deck that described the business on each of those 10 dimensions. We've actually signed a term sheet with that company, so hopefully we get to tell the story of how fun that was and how it all came together. But that was amazing to see. Like, a founder actually appreciated the content, ran with it. It helped her with business and helped her think through the subscription model. And so that's like the ideal dream scenario for me. And so it lends itself to those longer blog posts, and I'll let others participate in the Twitter meme game.
I have a couple more questions, then we'll call it a day. This one's a little off topic, but I'm curious. You write these long essays, these long posts. I'm curious, how'd you get into writing? And kind of why do you spend time writing these long posts, and how'd you get into it?
Honestly, I will say I was inspired by others who have written posts that I've referred back to several times during my 10 years in venture capital. I mean, people like Fred Wilson at USV and Bill Gurley at Benchmark have written iconic posts that have influenced my thinking as an investor and have helped me be better in lots of different ways. I mean, I think Fred's continuing still to write almost every day during the week, which is just amazing to me. And I think, I hope that I can keep writing, because I hope one day, folks who were like me 10 years ago, read those posts, and it helps them break into venture. It helps them be a better founder, or it helps them improve their business. And I think the really cool thing about writing is it's evergreen, right? Like you can Google and find these posts of Fred's or Bill's or someone like Paul Graham for years and years to come. And so I think I started on this journey because of that sort of desire to try to put something out there that folks find valuable for many years to come. And I've always enjoyed writing, but it is still hard for me pushing out these pieces. It's not like they come really easily. I think I have become faster by just practicing more and writing more. But every time I hit the publish button, it's still terrifying. And maybe one day it won't feel that way, but it certainly does still.
I've been writing on the internet since 2010 back on Tumblr. I love writing. The reason I ask is I'm a huge writer, and I definitely wait at least 2 minutes of like just hovering the publish button before I publish, even still, because it's so scary just to like to hit publish and get the audience. So I totally understand that. So my last question for you, and then we'll call it a day, is if someone wanted to learn more about footwork, specifically maybe a founder, how can they kind of find you online? Like, do you have assets like Twitter or podcast or writing? I guess, how can someone learn more about you or footwork on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, so on Twitter, I'm at NBT, just my initials, and you can DM me, and I'll try to respond. I haven't been as good about that recently, but I try to respond even to the cold DM outreach. Um, what I absolutely respond to is anyone who responds to a blog post of mine or who comments on a blog post. Because what's fun is you can have that discussion in public about a certain topic. And so check out, nbt.substack.com, which is um, my newsletter called Next Big Thing, and engage with any posts that you want to engage in, and I'll respond. And then at Footwork, we've got a site at footwork.vc, which lays out a little bit more about Mike and me, and what we invest in, and it's reasonably simple, but hopefully clear for folks to understand what we do there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Matt.